Bonjour. This morning is all about Swift UI, so we're going to continue with this. I hope you don't mind. We're in Paris, the city of love, so I want to start with telling you a love story. I love testing. It all started, like many love stories, it started at university. I was attending a Ruby course, and we were given challenges, and we had to submit code. And our teachers were a little bit sneaky, so they had this secret suite of tests. So when I submitted my code, I was very surprised to see that my code didn't fulfill all of the requirements, and I had failing tests. But this is where I actually realized the power of testing, and I really appreciated what automated testing can give you. Yeah, in university. So what I love about testing, well, tests give you fast feedback. You can see almost immediately what's happening. And tests are honest. Like if you have code that fulfills some requirements, the test should pass. Tests are repeatable. You can repeat them many times and get the same result, which is very nice if you have some states that are hard to reproduce, like, for example, error state, and you want to get back to it many times. And when you have code written and covered with tests, it's ultimately more safe to make changes. You feel that confidence. Testing also encourages you to think about the APIs that you're doing, like how are they supposed to be used, so clarity of usage. And ultimately, I think it's the best documentation. I hate reading through long docs, but when I see like a test that says this is how the code is intended to be used, I'm really happy about that. And tests are fun. You gotta love this feeling when you write a lot of code and you run and you see all of these green checks. Yeah, it's really nice. But in iOS, testing has always been a little bit an afterthought. When I started doing iOS programming, it was not like the trendiest thing. I think we came a long way in the community with a lot of great talks and books and stuff. We're moving to more testable architectures and even Redux, as you saw in the great talk before me. And now we have Swift UI, right? It's this new way of building UIs. I was personally, like most of the speakers, pretty excited about Swift UI when it came. However, it's not so new way of doing programming. Other languages have had declarative UIs for a long time. And at my company, Izetto, we actually borrowed a lot of ideas from declarative UIs and tried to implement them around UIKit. So this talk is really about my experience with finding ways to test in the declarative world. It can be challenging sometimes, but it took some time, but I think we figured out some things that I want to share with you today, and we're going to look at some Swift UI code and see, can we test this business logic, can we test the navigation, and can we prevent visual regressions? So that's the plan. And we start with business logic. And you're like, OK, this talk is about UI and testing. Why are you telling us about business logic? Well, we need to first separate, where do we put the boundary between UI and business logic? Because we have this bad habit of putting a lot of logic in the view. So we're going to look at this small example. It is, a simple screen, but what's interesting about it is that it has a secret feature that you can enable. It's pretty simple. If you are in a test group, so like some AB flag, you can get another UI that is like, OK, you have this button to enable the feature, and if you're an admin, you can enable it directly. But if you are just a user, you can see some information about this. So I hope this looks familiar to some of you, like A/B testing and putting conditionally a view. And let's see how we can do it with Swift UI. Here is a page footer component where we can decide which view to show. And the way we're going to do this is by checking if the user needs to be exposed to this feature. And then we're going to check if the user has permissions to do these changes. And then based on that, we'll decide, OK, we'll show a button, or we'll show a text, or we'll show nothing. So this code has these three ways to return a view. And it also has this way to determine which view to return. So how do we go about testing this and whether we get the right view? Because we don't want to expose this feature like unintentionally. And we can try to write a test about this. We instantiate the view. We pass the user that we want. We get the body. And then what do we do? As you heard earlier, body doesn't have any, like the view doesn't have any properties that are useful for us. And as Chris showed you, it's a very weird type. And if you add some modifiers, it will become like even longer type. So what do you do with this type? Do you just like poke around and extract things from it? Actually, that's not that crazy idea, but I'm not going to go that way. But on React, for example, developers are able to actually extract and query for things that are in the DOM tree. But this is just an idea for some of you that might try to recreate that behavior. We are going to take a different path here, and we are going to extract what we actually want to test. I don't care about the types, to be honest. I want to test that I get the right mode for this view. So I'm going to create this enum. And then I'm going to pass explicit mode to this view instead of the user, and then just make the decision based on that mode. So now I'm extracting that code that we had for the flags and stuff into a separate method that I can call. And as you can see here, I'm not importing Swift UI, it's just foundation. So this is like plain business logic, and you don't need UI to exercise this path. So how do we write a test about this? Let's take a user in the control group, and we are going to create this page footer with this user. And next thing, we are going to check what view mode we get. And we expect to get empty, so our test passes. And next thing is to write a test for the code to action example. And here we have almost similar code, except we are also able to provide a function that we want to be called when the action is called. And we can exercise this part as well by checking that executing the action will fulfill the expectation. Then we can check that our page view is actually properly connected to the service that we are passing. Cool. So this is, one simple example with a static mode. But where SwiftUI shines, really, is when you have dynamic behavior. So we are going to convert this to observable view model, and we are going to extract the mode into this view model and see when we change the view model, how the view will react to it. So we get, we need to conform to this protocol, observable object, and say that our mode is published so that we can get the events. And then we can derive the value of mode from our services, basically. And here I'm subscribing for the user when it changes, and also for the feature if it changes. And I'm going to create a new page footer and page footer mode. And when I publish this new value, then my view is going to update. I'm not sure if this is the best combine code, to be honest. I'm not an expert in combine, so don't take this as an example how you should write combine code. You should go to Daniel and ask him. OK. But this is actually going to work for us. And this is also a nice thing about testing, is that no matter how you wrote it, you can write a test, and later on someone comes and tells you, hey, you can do this in this other nice way, and you can just replace it, and if your test still passes, it's good. So this is another test. We are going to take a user in test group, and we are create this app state with this user, and then we are going to pass this to the view model. So now we can exercise that we get the right mode, but we can also check that when we change the state, then we also update the mode. So we can check that our view model is updating accordingly, and we kind of trust Swift UI that when it has observable object, that it will refresh. So we are not going into testing the implementation of the framework, but we are testing our logic. Right? So here are some things for you to take from this section. I think in big apps, it's very important to keep the views dump and to try to not hide business logic inside views, because we had this very simple footer, and yet it makes decisions. But imagine if you have a bigger view or like so many components, you don't know which one will make a decision about like showing different UI, and it can be very confusing. So I suggest putting these decisions outside of the view and writing tests for them. And here's another thing. I think those decisions that can be hidden in the view are also decisions about navigation. And I'm saying this, and I realize that in a lot of cases, it is OK to have the navigation inside the view. But if you have reusable components, or if your app is getting bigger, or if you want to be able to get what this app is doing without going through each screen and seeing like which component will navigate somewhere, then I think it's good to extract navigation logic. Again, at my company, we have a lot of benefits from doing this, like extracting all of the navigation logic into model objects, like flow objects, and then we check like if a condition is met that we go this path or that path. So how can we do this with Swift UI? Not that easy. Well, let's take the button example, and let's say that when the button is pressed, we want to show activation flow for this feature. And we pass an action, but yeah, we also need to create a navigation link, because this is how Swift UI understands that we need to go to another screen. So I'm going to try to do that, and this is one of the APIs that I can use for navigation link. It's basically telling it the destination and then how the component should look like. And here I'm not really sure what's the destination. And if you think about a footer view, maybe it doesn't know what's the destination. So I would rather like to use this action that is being passed to trigger a side effect. But I don't want to have this navigation link because I really don't know what to put there. So we're going to take away the navigation link and see who can handle the action. The way we created this footer view was by using the service. And we can tell the service to handle the action. And services can also have published properties or some other publishers. So here I'm simply modifying the state of this property to true to say that we want to be showing a navigation activation flow. And then I can let my main page, actually, that encapsulates this, this footer, the page that adds the navigation view, let it create also the navigation link, and use another API. So here I'm passing destination. I'm also passing isActive, which is binding. So whenever show activation flow changes to true, this binding will be triggered, and I'll navigate to another view. And know that here I'm using empty view for the navigation link. So this is the button is actually triggering the action, but then another UI kind of invisible component is taking the decision where to go. This hasn't been working very reliably with SwiftUI. So I don't know if in the latest versions it's still working, but there are workarounds for it, definitely. But I would like to see this kind of behavior, like being able to trigger an action from a button, a navigation from a button, to be implemented in SwiftUI in a reasonable way. So here is how I connected my state service to create this binding in the view model. And I really mean this red thing there. Like, it should be way easier than this. With the framework that I'm using at work, it's like 1 or 2 lines of code. So probably I'm doing something wrong. But let's not focus on this. Let's look at the test. We have a similar setup for the test, and we are creating a page view model with a state. Then we can get the action, and we can execute the action. And sorry, first we can see that we are not showing navigation flow. And then we can execute the action, and after that we expect that the state will change. So this can be useful to see that one component is integrated with another component, and it triggers the right thing that you expect. And we are not creating any views here. But now we are moving to views, finally. You're like, UIs, and she's just talking about business logic tests. Yeah, the thing is that I also care about how views look like. It's one thing to give SwiftUI instructions, like render this view model, render that view model, but then how it will look like. This is great addition by Apple. They actually added Xcode previews. I really mean it, like this is the best feature for me. We were waiting for such a long time for live previews. Whenever you change something in the code, it will actually reflect on the other side, but that's on the latest macOS version. And the way debug previews work is basically you configure your view with some data. Then you say, I want to see it in this type of configuration. So you can say the device or accessibility. You can say dark mode. And then you just pass that configuration to this preview provider, and it will render each time you do a change. And this is a great session about debug previews, actually. I don't know if many of you seen it. How many have seen this session? Not that many. I see like 10 hands, maybe. This is a session about mastering Xcode previews, in which Apple not only tells us about a lot of shortcuts about Xcode and stuff, it also rediscovers MVVM and also gives us their opinion about testing. So they say, OK, you derive view models from from models. Then you should write logic tests. Then, when you switch from view model to view, you should rely on Xcode previews. And as someone that written a lot of views and caused a lot of regressions with views, I'm like, yeah, sure, but when something breaks, like, how do you find it? Well, you have all of these characteristics of previews, but one thing is missing for me, and that is safety. Because if you have hundreds of previews and you change something in some environment object and it propagates through your whole application, how did you know that you broke something? Like, how do you take things apart? I don't know. So for me, the answer here is that visual validation should also be automated if you care about how your UI looks and you don't have the time to go through all of the screens or previews and check that nothing broke. And it comes to no surprise for some of you that I say I love snapshot testing. Snapshot testing is great, I think. Here is how it works for those of you that don't know. So you create a view model, and then you configure a view with it, and then you set the snapshot configuration that you want to have, and then you render that view and snapshot it. Right, so when you run the test for the first time, a snapshot test, it will capture a snapshot. It can be many things like data or image or some other representation. And we'll focus on images now. And next time you execute the test, it will render the same thing, and it will compare the two snapshots. I need to say that like this part here is a little bit like tricky because it's not supported natively. We work with some window that we configure with traits, and by this we try to simulate the environment. But it does the job in snapshot testing. And I hope by this point you see that there is actually not that much difference between debug previews and snapshot tests. I really had to replace 2 words in this. So I thought, like, why not combine them? because I'm going to write a lot of previews for my views, and I want to get the benefit of having tests as well for them, and I want to get that automatically. So we are going to create a solution that will do that. For this, I'm going to use this example from Apple. It's the Landmarks application. It has more UI, so it's better than my example. So we'll focus on this screen. This is actually taken from the debug previews as screenshots. We have two states of this landmarks list. It can be favorites only or the full list. And the way we generate previews for this view is by saying, OK, this is the view, this is how I configure it, and passing some configuration to it. This is the configuration, so we say preview device is iPhone, and this is the name that renders below the screenshot. So you can pass preview device, you can pass preview layout, you can pass many, many things. I'm just going to go quickly through those. But just so that you see how powerful it is, in debug previews, you can really customize many, many things that you can test at the same time. Like you can set dark mode or right to left text for the markets that you support. So it's really good. I really want to use this in my snapshot tests. So we have these two views, and I want to be able to capture snapshots for them. So to do that, I'm going to use this snapshot testing framework, which is from the Point Free guys, and it's open source. As you can see in the example, it's very, very easy to capture a snapshot of anything that is supported by the library. So I think it's very easy to capture a snapshot of Swift UI as well, because we can add it to a hosting controller. So let's do that. In the framework, you need to provide a testing strategy for a certain type of view if it's not already implemented. So we need to provide testing strategy for Swift UI views. And this is already in a PR from in the open source repo. So I'm going to skip this. It's like 5 lines. But this is not the important part. The important part is that you can just get the previews, actually. Previews is a view, a group of views. And you can snapshot it directly after you have this. And what you get is this thing. This is one file that will contain all of the views that are in the group. So this is really good, actually. This is one line, so it's pretty great. But it's one file with all of the tests. And I usually want to separate them in different files so that I can say, like, OK, this failed, so I can tell what changed. So I thought, in order to get the benefit and reuse the previews in snapshot tests, let's create a protocol that describes both of them. And it's really like, just tell me what to preview and how I can create a view from it. So this is a simple struct. Preview data will have the name that we will use for the preview or the snapshot. And we'll pass a view model and a preview configuration, which is going to be just a simple struct that will tell us what's the identifier of this configuration and how we can apply the modifier to a view to get another view. And because we want to use this in many, many different cases, we are going to use type erased views with any view. So once we have this, it becomes really easy to create a protocol extension where we can get, for all of the view models, for all of the configurations that we are interested about, we can modify the view to use that configuration, and then we can just return that view with a specified display name. So this will give us previews. And this is extracting the view configuration from the debug previews to a separate method that conforms to this protocol, which allows us, in turn, to do this. In our debug previews, we can say, I want to return just these debug previews from the conformance of the protocol. But it also allows us to do this. We can write snapshot tests for all of these previews with one line of code. And this is what we get. So you can see the names of the configurations, the names of the view models, and also you can see how useful it can be because we are rendering with large accessibility size or dark mode, and we can see our UI in all of these configurations. And the best part is that if we make a change and we actually accidentally break our logic, our tests will scream at us and they will tell us, OK, this is the reference, but I got this. So this is the diff, and you figure out what changed. So that's way easier than that picture where we need to find the change. Some takeaways. I'm running out of time, sorry. Yeah, SwiftUI might be new, but the concepts it's using are not that new. We should learn from each other, from other platforms as well. You should just talk to your colleague that is doing React and ask, like, hey, how do you approach testing? They also use snapshot testing. We can make our views more testable if we extract those decisions from the views. And even if you don't write tests, I think it's going to be better for you, like if you just move that business logic from the views, because it can be really distracting and overwhelming when reading huge views with logic. And we can notice regressions by combining our debug previews, because I'm sure that all of you are going to write a lot of debug previews. So if you write them in a way that you can share them, there you can have one-line test for them, which is pretty cool. And finally, navigation flow. I'm not sure if we're there yet. I think the APIs from Apple need a little bit more updates, maybe. But yeah, I'm going to follow up on this, because this is just a start of this discussion. I really hope that this inspires you and you are starting to talk more about this, because I believe that the future has SwiftUI in it, or some other kind of framework for declarative UIs, and the future has tests, so we need to think about that. And I'll see. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Nataliya. So, Thomas, Nataliya, please join us. Well, so putting testing and fun in the same talk. Well, yeah. It was a challenge, but you nailed it.
I love it. Yeah. It's fun, really.
I trust, yeah. This new approach of UI code is changing the way you need to test, because some of us with nib files or storyboards got used to probably not test exactly all the UI code. I'm seeing some people getting high. So what do you think this new approach will change in terms of UI testing? Do you need to test more and to have a larger coverage, especially in UI code?
I think it should not change the way you approach testing in your product, in your company. You need to be, I think, very mindful about what standard you are going for. There are definitely applications that don't need a lot of automation. Small applications that is more manageable to do it on your own, or manual tests. But yeah, I think we should keep the same standards, basically.
And can you tell us a bit more about what it changes about XC UI tests? Can you still use that?
Yeah, it doesn't change, I think, almost anything about XUI test, except that there are some, people are struggling to find the elements using the XPaths, but that's just, I think, the frameworks. But apart from that, XUI tests are for integration tests, which are black box tests. So it doesn't really matter how you implement your UI. And that's why I focus more on the white box testing, where you can actually go to specific states easier.
Nice. When you come to the same question as before, when you come to moving to SwiftUI and gradually integrating SwiftUI into a real-world application, I think you've done that. Do you have some advices to gradually adopt and learn and ship that code?
Well, yes. At Glows, the application I'm working full time, you can actually, if you want to ship some feature only on iOS 13, you can with SwiftUI, and it's actually recommended. I would recommend to ship some SwiftUI feature to try. You can really easily transition from UI kit view to a new like SwiftUI view and build something you want in SwiftUI in it. And yeah, you will only be able to ship this feature on iOS 13, but why not? I think it's time to do it right now.
Yeah, it's a good way to actually learn.
Yeah, to try SwiftUI on, yeah.
Yes. So we spoke about architecture finally because we've seen like MVC by Apple since I know the 80s basically. We're seeing something different. If I'm not mistaken, there are some slides from Apple's talk mentioning view models.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Is that actually finally changed once for all, in your opinion?
Apple had a really great conference about the SwiftUI data flow, and they didn't mention Redux or anything like that, but they strongly hint at it, that you should, like, it's built with a state with a property wrapper like published, observable object, and state. It's built for like some kind of unidirectional data flow, and yeah, it's moving like, you can have a view, you can have a view model, you can have a model on a view, and actually even like maybe bypass the view model, and yeah, that's moving. We're moving to a new direction.
I think again, like with the delegates that were shown before, like some parts of Apple might be like using this, and some others might ship still APIs with that don't allow us to do this. But anyway, I think Apple videos and docs will always cover the more general case, and it's up to us to like define how we want to deal with separation of concerns. I think Redux is a great implementation of that, and it might be a little bit too much for some people, so they can start with smaller steps to achieve unidirectional data flow.
Yeah, and actually that's what I was saying. Like SwiftUI offer you like great tools to actually do that very easily with property wrappers. So Redux it's really good if you're making like some bigger application, but you can totally.
And can you tell us more about Redux and its history and where you?
Yeah, so Redux got quite popular because of React. React on Redux is React is on Facebook. It's a front-end web application JavaScript framework, so you can make web app with it. And I strongly hint that you should use Redux with it. Actually, you have to use Redux with it. And it's got popular from there. It doesn't come from Facebook. It's like it's older. It was used in game and it's a state machine. So. But it got quite popular with React, and there is actually a lot of open source implementation of it in various languages. For UIKit, for Android, for a lot of languages, there is actually Redux library today.
Yeah, it's more an approach than.
Yeah, it's more an approach than it's just a design pattern for your data.
And I remember when Facebook launched React Native back in 2015, 16, forgot. They said that React was like a kind of a learn once, run everywhere thing. Is that, I mean, are we like getting closer to that? I mean, can we finally like have a meeting with our web developer friends and say, okay, this is gonna be the implementation, more or less, of course not into detail, and then all front-end apps can just have this implementation?
Alors, because of Redux, actually, at Close, we're working all our clients, like iOS, Android, on the web, use Redux. So we have really common languages to talk about these technologies. When we create a new feature, we have a really the same language, like how we architecture this feature. And in terms of front-end code, because of SwiftUI, it's actually really close. When you look at the code for SwiftUI component and the code for React component, on top of that, if you use Redux in your SwiftUI app, it's actually really, really close in terms of syntax. You could almost think like Swift look like JavaScript.
Okay. Yes.
And Nataliya, did you look at that kind of frameworks to get to imagine your new ideas of how to test that?
Oh, well, I looked into how web is doing things. I also tried to look into how Android is doing, because they have the compose thing. Yeah, that was introduced this year. So looks like we are catching up and everyone is moving in the same direction. At least that's good. Yeah, and in terms of React, the testing strategies that I saw are mostly around either snapshot testing. Well, it's not either or, actually people combine them, like snapshot testing, but also there is this testing where you can query similar to expats. You say, I want a button, and there you're actually testing that the thing change. You're not testing that when you call a method, it will change some internal state.
Sorry, can you quickly explain what snapshot testing is? Because I'm not sure everyone is familiar with.
So it was in the talk. You were not very focused,
No,
but
okay, catch.
But I think it's completely understandable because you're doing great work with the conference and it's going very smooth. So yeah, but snapshot testing, you capture one version of a view, or it can be of any other object actually, and then you compare it with another version of the same object, and if they match, the test passes, and otherwise it fails.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
So
sorry for that strange question.
For information, Mathieu has 3 children. He's running like 3 companies, he's building a conference at the same time.
It's hard also backstage to
should we
follow
give them
everything.
a round of applause?
Oh, thank you.
We talked about the business logic in views. One thing I fear when I see like Apple examples sometimes in Swift UI is that there is there is a lot of at-state properties. Is that safe to use, or is just like safe-ish for and demo purposes or simple projects?
If you make like a small app with few components, it's very, very safe to use. The problem starts when you get one root component and you have like a lot of state that you pass with the binding, by binding to few other components. So you have to pass them in the initializer of your new view. And sometimes you start to have like a hierarchy of view, and you pass them, you have that state somewhere and binding somewhere else. It can get complicated, and that's why you can use Redux.
Okay.
Actually, in that session that I showed from Apple about Matrix Xcode previews, they have an example where they have a state, and then they want to see 2 different versions of that view in the previews, and they can't directly because you are not able to access state from outside of the body function. That's literally the error message that you get. So what they do is they actually create a container, and they put the content inside a container and create a binding. So yeah, that's one thing about states, that it's always a little bit more than just having a state. And I think it's completely different talk, and very long talk probably, about all of these property wrappers for dynamic behavior that we get, like read and write access. I have a lot of
We'll have a
opinions
talk
about that.
on property wrappers later tomorrow. And if you want to join the CFP for next year with the advanced talk on that, you're more than welcome.
Sure.
Last question. Okay.
I think we will move on to the next speaker.
It was
I'm sorry.
interesting.
Yes, please.
Okay, thank you very much for your talks.
Thank you.